You're listening to the Quint's podcast.
If you're a Facebook user in Australia, you may have woken up to a very different news feed on 18 February. And don't worry, your account was not hacked. What happened is that the social media giant took the nuclear option in response to the Australian government's proposed law that would require big tech platforms like Facebook and Google to reach commercial agreements and strike revenue deals with news outlets whose content drives traffic on these platforms. And in the early hours of 18 February, Facebook actually followed through on its earlier threat that it will ban all news websites and also the option for users to share news links. But the move unintentionally also resulted banning Facebook pages of government health departments, fire and rescue, the Suicide Prevention Australia page, charities, and somehow Facebook's own official page as well. And this is actually a cause of concern because Australia is a few days away from a national COVID-19 vaccine rollout. However, executives at Facebook were quick to realize of this fumble and apologize for the error. But according to Facebook, the pages of government departments will take at least a week to come back. So in today's episode, we'll go through why has Facebook banned news in the middle of a pandemic? Will misinformation, conspiracy theories fill the void that news outlets have left? And what does this step mean for other countries like India? To discuss all this, in today's episode, you'll hear from Udhbhav Tiwari, who is a policy advisor at Mozilla. You'll also hear voices of Australian Facebook users and what they think of the ban. You're tuned in to The Big Story, the podcast where we dissect the headline-making news for you, and I'm your host, Himmat. In a Facebook post on 18 February, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison described Facebook's action as arrogant and disappointing. On the other hand, Facebook defends its action, stating that the proposed Australian law fails to recognize the fundamental nature of the relationship between the platform and publishers. But did the ban actually affect the daily lives of Facebook users in Australia? Saryu Mahajan from Melbourne believes that a news-free Facebook may actually bring back what Facebook was meant for, which is sharing life updates and photos.
News outlets should be compensated, should be paid for their services. And if Google can do it, I'm sure Facebook can do it too. In a way, if you look at it, Facebook is back to doing what it was meant to do, which is share your kids' photographs and your vacation photographs. So it's not too bad. It's not a bad story after all.
Facebook user Mihir, also from Melbourne, says that the company has the right to ban news outlets, but has opened the floodgates to misinformation and fake news.
Well, I believe Facebook, as a private company, has the full right to ban all these news channels in Australia, given the laws. I mean, you cannot hold it against the company for doing this. The problem here really lies on how poorly educated and easily influenced people are to social media. People generally just see the headlines on Facebook when they're scrolling through the page and do not cross-verify or look at any other source or even the credibility of the source who is posting on Facebook and truly believe that the news is true.
So, why exactly did Facebook ban news outlets in Australia? Let's rewind the clock to December 2020, when a new law called the Media Bargaining Code was proposed in the Australian Parliament. In a gist, this law proposed that big tech companies like Google and Facebook enter into agreements with Australian news outlets like The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald, and this will in turn result in a commercial revenue agreement where tech companies pay news outlets for their content. At the moment, news publishers receive only a tiny slice of the ad revenues generated from their content. And this revenue is also not stable since it depends a lot on the algorithms which are in a constant flux. And this also impacts how much visibility a particular post gets and also its reach. And to put into context how exactly small that revenue share is, according to a 2020 report by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, from a typical $100 spent by advertisers in 2018, $49 went to Google, $24 to Facebook, and $27 to all other websites and ad tech. And with COVID-19, the media industry in Australia took more revenue hits as more people moved online and companies were forced to spend a lot more on digital advertising. Now, the other giant in the mix is Google, or actually was, up until a few days ago. The search giant also previously made the same threats as Facebook, which is pulling the Google search services in Australia. But on 17 February, Google struck a global deal with Rupert Murdoch-controlled media company News Corp and decided to pay for journalism. Alongside News Corp, Google has also struck deals with Nine Entertainment, which is Australia's biggest TV network and the publisher of the Sydney Morning Herald and the Australian Financial Review. It also chalked out a deal with Seven West Media, the second biggest TV network. According to Udhbhav Tiwari, Google's acceptance in paying news publishers is also reflective of their new product called Google Showcase, which compensates news outlets for their stories.
Google, as you can imagine, is a search engine, and news serves a very important part of when people look for things on the internet and how they discover that information. And what Google has the freedom and ability to do is it also operates a separate service called Google News. And because of that, Google has actually struck a deal with all of these platforms and also, in fact, in publishers in France, in the UK, and elsewhere in the world to for a particular product called News Showcase, which is going to be a specific sort of space within Google News that will involve Google sharing licensing fees with these providers. And this doesn't, and it's possibly a way for Google to sort of like push the question of whether people should be able, whether a news publisher should be paid for their links turning up on Google search a little further down the road.
But the larger question is that is Facebook allowed to ban news? What about free speech? The answer is yes. As a private company, Facebook is entitled to curate content on its platform. Flicking the switch and kicking out journalism from its platform may also open the floodgates to more misinformation, fake news, and conspiracy theories, which has been a recurring issue that the platform is trying to fix. In countries like the United States, Canada, the EU, Australia have been trying to bring tech companies to size and make them more accountable. And that call has also reached India. Hours after Facebook silenced all news publishers down under, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison on 18 February also raised the issue of regulation with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Udhbhav Tiwari believes that such deals like the one between News Corp and Google will only take place between big news publishing players in India and will rule out smaller companies.
So in India, very prominent newspapers like Times of India have been running editorials from the editorial board that have advocated for a very similar approach, not just with what's happened in Australia now, but also in the past with what's happened in Europe with the copyright directive. And that definitely bodes as a very like dangerous trend, because as one can imagine, such agreements don't really favor small or medium players. Right? Like you have to be a company like, for example, like Orthodox Media Empire or otherwise of a particular size to be able to get these deals and these agreements with such large platforms in place. So I think that that the whole idea of is this good or bad for journalism certainly needs to be interrogated. It simply isn't enough that any of these moves will actually lead to money being invested back into journalism rather than just another revenue stream on a sort of like line item for large publishing conglomerates. I think that one should be very careful before walking down that road, because it may have very disastrous consequences, not just for the small and medium players in the publisher ecosystem, but also simply how the internet works in general.
However, is banning news outlets the best solution to the problem if platforms like Facebook do not want to pay news outlets? Udhbhav feels that the buck can't stop with the news outlets relying on platforms for revenue and should start adapting to more avenues of digital revenue.
Many media organizations all over the world are already doing is evolving for a digital first world. Right? Like if you look at organizations like the New York Times or the Washington Post, the reason they've largely been able to stay away from many of these conversations is because they have actually developed very sophisticated ways of making their services available online. And New York Times now makes more money from digital subscribers than it does from print and physical ones, and has for some time. And also has its own advertising sort of like outfit, collects first-party data, and does many of the things that the larger outfits. So with regard to the larger outfits, I would say that they definitely have the potential and the capability to be able to adopt for a world that is digital first, and that is a much more sustainable solution for journalism in general, rather than just simply, becoming more beholden to the larger online platforms for revenue and access than you were in the past. Because you may be making more revenue right now, but that also means that that revenue stream is another source of dependence, both of discovery and of access. But if this is a question about money and publishers not sufficiently being compensated, then I think that rather than striking individual bargaining codes, if, for example, let's imagine the government were to charge like a fee, right? If you were a platform with a threshold, a certain percentage, like over and above the tax that you already pay in the country, called, say, and this is all hypothetical, but something like a journalism tax, right? And then the government took that money and invested it in small and medium publishers. Even at a very high level, even that would be much better and for publishing in general than the current model that just makes sure that the largest publishing houses get more money from the largest technological platforms.
Australia's media bargaining code points to one of the most basic concepts of the internet, which is hyperlinking text. What remains to be seen is that does Facebook's move end up just being a temporary chest beating, or will it be a permanent fixture in our digital landscape? If you liked listening to this episode, please subscribe to The Big Story for episodic updates. We're available on Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, JioSaavn, and most of the other popular podcast streaming platforms. For other podcasts, please log on to the Quint website, and for any feedback, please shoot an email to podcast@thequint.com.
Thanks for listening. Log on to the Quint's website and check out our other podcasts.